It is Thursday, November 2nd, and this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm your co-host, John Sheeran. My co-host, Anthony Cosenza, is working through some issues at the moment, but we are here for the second time this week, going to break down this upcoming Sunday night football matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals. And there's our boy AC. How you doing, man?
Welcome to the live broadcast of the show. We're going to talk about the huge matchup between the Cincinnati Bengals as they host the Buffalo Bills. And man, there's going to be a lot of emotion in this one, John, for a variety of reasons. I think there's been a lot of kind of chirping, and I know all the Bills players have held on to a lot of different things over the course of 10 months, and also, of course, we cannot forget what happened on the primetime game last time these two teams were in Cincinnati. So there's just priming up to be a lot of emotion, hopefully a good game in general, but an interesting one. Two teams that have shown a lot, but have also shown a couple of struggles this year too.
Right. You have a team in the Bengals who are finding their stride the past few weeks, and the Bills are kind of on this little Bills roller coaster in the past 4 weeks where they're 2-2. But man, just talking about the recent history now between these two, it used to just be kind of this friendly brotherhood of two teams who maybe would share some players and would share some great sentiment, specifically with Andy Dalton sending the Bills to the playoffs for the first time back in 2017. But the past two games have just brought in so much complexion and maybe complications with both teams. And now I don't really know what the vibe is anymore. Obviously, when you beat a team in the playoffs and then you face them the year later, there's going to be a lot of riding on the team looking for vengeance and everything. But, I think both sides have sort of an edge to them in terms of just facing the other opponent. And that's why they scheduled this game for the bright lights.
Yeah, Antonio here. Forget that friendship mess. Crush them from our live Facebook chat. There's a lot of history here. And a lot of it actually took place last week, not last week, where the Bengals and the Bills, just kind of their paths just crossed in a lot of different weird ways last year. Obviously, there's a lot of history, both going back to the Jim Kelly, Boomer Esiason days, and then Ryan Fitzpatrick played for the Bills as well as the Bengals. So there's a lot of divergent paths here, and convergent paths, I guess, too. So, and then of course I was reminded again this week, I was on a Rochester radio show talking about the game. And I was reminded, of course, of the old Andy Dalton, Tyler Boyd play from a few years ago that got the Bills into the playoffs for the first time in like 17 years, I think it was. So a lot of history here. We're going to talk about we may be joined by a special guest to help us preview. We're waiting to hear back, but let's talk about this because we earlier this week we talked about the trade deadline, and we hinted at the fact that the Bengals not making a move, not swinging a trade for a tight end, although they maybe should have or very well could have for a low premium. It may have meant Tanner Hudson being elevated to the team, and that's the direction they were going. Well, lo and behold, that's what happened. It happened on Wednesday. And that was the move the Bengals wanted to make. They wanted to elevate Tanner Hudson. And maybe we haven't heard too much about them pursuing or not pursuing trades. We just know that they didn't make one. So, from that standpoint, I guess you go, okay, well, now Tanner Hudson is your guy. And, I don't know if that was the plan all along or if that was the contingency plan for not getting one, but here he is.
Well, you would think he's the guy, considering they signed him to the team, and now they have 4 tight ends on the active roster. they're not going to have 4 active on game day, I would assume, unless injuries kind of force their hand in that regard. Maybe they will. I have no idea, but that's just the assumption now, because you figure something has to evolve, something has to change. They need to inject some life into the position, and Tanner Hudson, at least in a very very small sample size, show that he can do that. But I guess it is truly kind of an unknown until we kind of see it unfold before us. I would imagine that Irv is still practicing with the starters, and I don't know if it's just going to be a clean swap in, swap out for one or the other. So maybe this is just a thing where, because Tanner Hudson, his entire production this year has come when Irv Smith has been injured. Like, he missed 2 games with a hamstring injury, then he came back against the Cardinals, and Hudson was on the practice squad ever since. So that's the biggest thing for me, is like, is this transition going to happen immediately? Is there no transition at all? Are they going to try to symbiotically play together and just be utilized in different situations in the passing game? Whatever the case may be, I don't think we have a clear answer as of yet. But you're right. The fact that they did nothing, at least they didn't swing for any tight end at the trade deadline, and then they called up Hudson, not as an elevation, but as actually signing him off the practice squad. That's a fair assumption to make, but we just don't know how it's all going to transpire over the next couple of weeks.
So, do you see him integrating pretty much immediately right now? I mean, and in this game, the last time the Bengals had a primetime game, he was in it, and he this year, and he made a few plays there. So, do you think that this is a player that they just are going to have there, and it's maybe just for this week and this week's game plan, or is this kind of not only maybe shine this week, but moving forward, he may be the guy that they rely on in a lot of passing situations?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I think the best prediction would just be they'll both play at least somewhat on Sunday night. Maybe Irv will play more, and I think they'll both get different opportunities. Now, granted, the opportunities are pretty limited for tight ends in this offense, but we don't know how that changes once they have someone they feel like they can actually rely on and is consistent and competent in some of the areas where they've been lacking in, at least this year. So I don't know. I would imagine that he's at least active for Sunday night, and that potentially means maybe Mitchell Wilcox doesn't get active, or maybe they go short someplace else. It's just weird for this offense specifically to have 4 tight ends dressing, regardless of their special teams impact or not. So if he's on the roster now, that means that they clearly value him enough to prevent him from being signed off to another team off the practice squad. And considering the obvious, they have no production out of that position, they have to give him at least a chance on Sunday night for sure.
Well, we're going to talk about the injury report in just a second, but one thing is for sure that the Bills are, at least at cornerback, hurting. Their top corner is out for the year, and then they just put Kaiir Elam, a guy that the Bengals, who supposedly were maybe targeting, or that was a mock draft frequent pick to the Bengals a year ago, and that did not take place. So he has now been placed on IR. Kaiir Elam has as well. So, obviously, those are the guys tasked with mostly covering the wide receivers, but this is where you kind of say maybe the Bengals, with this move with Tanner Hudson, a depleted secondary for the Buffalo Bills, maybe this is where they say, this is an opportunity where we can be really pass happy this week and find a lot of opportunities through the air.
Right. I mean, when they faced the Bills last year, their defense was considerably better. I think they had a more consistent pass rush. Fortunately for the Bengals in this case, like, they didn't have to face the full force of Von Miller. He got hurt at the end of last year. Von Miller at least is healthy now, but he's not, like, he's a rotational guy at best right now. I think he's still not quite 100%, which is why he's not getting a ton of opportunities, but he's still there and he's still kind of making an impact. It's just when you're 35 years old and you rely so much on your knees to bend around the edge, have so much wear and tear, like that's got to be tough on him. But you're right. Like, the cornerbacks right now are Dane Jackson and Christian Benford, 2 guys who maybe have good weeks here and there, but I don't know how much that you can rely on them on a week-to-week basis. The key, though, and this is always brought up when the Bengals talk about the Bills, is that their safeties are still strong. Like Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, 2 veterans of the game, 2 very interchangeable pieces as well. And just like the Bengals had Jesse Bates and Von Bell, they established that relationship for years. They communicated well, and they always knew where to be. That's pretty much the same as it goes for Hyde and Poyer. So in terms of keeping the cap on the Bengals offense, I think the Bills will be fine there. But there's definitely chances on the perimeter for one-on-one matchups with the receivers and specifically the safeties. Though, like you have to think that they're going to be keying in on the Bengals tight ends, and if Tanner Hudson's out there, that seems to me like a key that it's going to be a passing play. So yeah, like I think the Bills will be ready, but unfortunately, like you said, they're just shorthanded at that very important position.
They are, and I know they have very capable safeties, very, very good players, but it just does make their roles, their duties a little bit more difficult. That with the top corners out, I mean, they just gotta their margin for error is slimmer with the top corners being out. So, at any rate, we're going to get you up to date on the injury report before we kind of start previewing this game and talking about a number of different things. Some good news for both teams in terms of star players coming back to practice. John, the Bills got back Josh Allen, who is nursing a shoulder issue, and the Bengals got back Trey Hendrickson. Both guys sat out Wednesday's practice, but Thursday they did practice. Hendrickson had the ankle issue that we talked about on Tuesday, where it was kind of a scary situation. He was down on the ground for a little while, but ended up coming back and playing like the maniac he is against the 49ers.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. Like, he's officially listed with a foot injury, and it seemed like his ankle was the thing that got stepped on. So it's just clearly in that general area. I guess we don't have a clear definition of what the actual injury is, but head coach Zach Taylor did say that it wasn't something that he expected would keep him out of this game. He got Wednesday off as like an extra rest day. Thursday is typically the practice where they kind of go the hardest. So long as he's participating then, which he was limited on Thursday. He's probably on track to end up playing. Unfortunately, the same probably can't be said with Josh Tupou and Tyson Anderson. They both missed both Wednesday and Thursday. They seem to be heading towards the inactive list. But other good news, though, Orlando Brown, he was limited. They're just managing his groin injury. He's going to be fine. He played well against San Fran. Joe Mixon showed up with a chest injury, which was interesting. I know, these things are kind of random and they kind of pop up when we don't really notice it during the game, but he was as a full participant. Akeem Davis-Gaither, though, he's been out for, I think, the past 4 weeks with a knee injury. They didn't place him on IR because they didn't expect the injury to be this serious, even though he could have been on IR for the past 4 weeks, and then they could have just activated him now. But he was limited in practice. So these are the first few times that he's practiced since, I think, week 3. So I don't know if it's too early to say that he's on track to play, considering he hasn't had a full practice yet. Maybe he practices full on a Friday, but the Bengals are still 5 deep at linebacker. The Bills are not typically a team that go heavy. I wouldn't expect more than 5 linebackers to be active anyways. So this may be just one more rest week for Davis-Gaither. Maybe he does play, and maybe he's active and he hardly plays. Maybe he's just on special teams. Whatever the case may be, pretty good health so far, aside from maybe Tupou and Anderson.
Tupou's a name we just haven't talked about really at all this year. So, and he's been a guy that, especially in those AFC North games, he's kind of been key. I know he's made some big plays in the past against the Ravens and whatnot. So, maybe down the stretch, he becomes a little bit more of a featured player, an important player. But yeah, I mean, did not practice. He's trending to not play, as you said. I'm really interested to see what they will do with Akeem Davis-Gaither once he's back. And these are again, because Davis-Gaither, I mean, he does a little bit of everything. He's been playing more in space as a pro, but if you remember in college, he had some pass rush ability, and he can do a lot of different things. So again, this is one of those players that you're getting back, not talked about a lot, but maybe this is also where the Bengals said, hey, this is another piece coming back to the defense, so maybe we don't need to swing another trade for whatever it may be that we feel or that some of us feel that's lacking there. You're getting this guy back, and then you elevate Tanner Hudson, and then those guys kind of get thrust into the conversation of, well, maybe this is why trades were not made, because they've got these guys waiting in the wings.
Yeah, it's a lot of faith in those guys, but Davis-Gaither he's been here for a minute. He was drafted with Logan Wilson and Marcus Bailey in the 2020 class, and I'm impressed because special teams was a big issue for them last year, and he's one of their big special team staples, and he remains to be. And he hasn't played in the past 4 weeks, and there haven't been a lot of miscues in terms of punt coverage, kick coverage. So they've done a good job of compensating for him not being out there. And on defense, you're right. Like, he's mainly been a coverage guy for them, and he's been an asset in that regard. He used to just be the extra linebacker that they would put on the field to face Lamar Jackson, and now his role has kind of evolved to being more of that drop back guy in those shallow zones. And I think he has at least 2 interceptions that I can think of the past couple of years. So he's been valuable there, and that could be. You're right. Like, if he does play this week, and Josh Allen gets a little too careless, which sometimes he does. He thinks that he
Mm-hmm.
can fit into windows that end up not being there. There could be a situation where Davis Gaither ends up being where Allen doesn't expect, and he makes a game-changing play. But we're allowed to see if he ends up being played or ends up playing at all. Because honestly, you have Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson playing out of their minds right now, and they're
Yep.
rarely coming off the field, and they're just doing a little bit of everything. And I think they have to feel really good about that position group right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, Josh Allen, the throwing shoulder, didn't practice Wednesday and went full Thursday. One of those things where, remember last year he had, was it the elbow issue where it was
Yeah.
kind of a ligament strain that lingered along for a long time. So, you never know how this is going to affect him in the cold. Throwing shoulder, don't know, but did go full practice. So there's pretty much no way he's not going to play. Damar Hamlin, of all people, shows up on the injury report this week. Did not practice on Wednesday with an illness, but went full Thursday. I think if that's the reported illness and he went full on Thursday based on the storyline that would take place on Sunday night, I find it very hard to believe he would not be on the field in some capacity unless something else happens there. Quentin Morris, backup tight end, has an ankle injury, went limited, and then full on Thursday. A little bit thin at the linebacker group for the Buffalo Bills, even though they don't have a ton of injuries reported here. So you got a thin group at cornerback because of the 2 injuries. And then you've to the starters, and then you've got Balin Spencer, linebacker, hamstring, didn't practice both days, and then AJ Klein, an outside linebacker, back injury, was not noted on Wednesday, it looks like, but did not practice Thursday. So a little bit thin potentially at a couple of defensive position groups for the Bills.
You can trace a lot of the Bills' problems on defense right now back to week 5 when Matt Milano, their star linebacker, he suffered a
Mm-hmm.
season-ending leg injury. And the Bills' defense, I think, is like they're 29th in EPA per play since then, specifically 27th against the pass. So Klein has had to step up. He's 32 years old now, and he's basically taking his spot there at linebacker. And the results just haven't really been the same. And I think also in that Jaguars game over in London, which is the game where Milano was injured, Daquan Jones was also hurt. And I think he's out for the year as well, which is kind of why the Bills have been kind of busy adding some notable veterans this week. They signed Leonard Fournette to the practice squad, so he might be elevated for this game. They traded for Rasul Douglas, who's going to help out a cornerback because they do need help at cornerback. And they signed Linval Joseph today to like a $3.5 million deal, like in the middle of the
Yeah.
season. I don't know if he's obviously well rested considering he hasn't played or practiced at all this year. And this is clearly just like, oh, I'm going to sign to a contender to help him out get to the Super Bowl. It's quite a bit of dough for only 10 weeks left in the regular season. So it wouldn't shock me if he's just out there, kind of like a Quinn Spain situation where they just put him in without any practice time. They need him though, because defensive tackle has been kind of a weakness for them. And just in general, that defense is just really shaky because they've had to overcome a lot of adversity there. I will say with Damar Hamlin, he's only played in 1 game this year, and he was just on special teams a few weeks ago. So if he is active, maybe he does get some snaps just because it would be a great moment. But I'm not quite expecting him to be much of an impact on defense.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Bills depth chart roster and those on injured reserve. You mentioned a couple names, and there is a lot of there's some decent names on here, well-known names that are on their injured reserve list. Unfortunately for them, Kaiir Elam, like we mentioned, the corner, Damian Harris, the running back, Daquan Jones, you mentioned him, Matt Milano, the linebacker, and then they actually are showing Balin Spector, who we have on here, on the injured reserve list, and then of course Tre'Davious White, the other corner. So they are they're having some problems here with injuries. That was noted, obviously, on that radio show that I went on in The Fan in Rochester. But that they were kind of keeping things together with, duct tape, bubble gum, the whole thing. But some opportunities potentially for the Bengals to exploit.
And on the offensive side of the ball, Dawson Knox has not had a great year, but he's also hurt right now. I think he was declared out for like 2 weeks last week. So last week against the Bucks, that was the Thursday night game. You had Dalton Kincaid, the Kyrie Elam, Dalton Kincaid, a lot of popular mock draft selections for Bengals fans. They're now both on the Buffalo Bills, and I think Kincaid found the end zone for the first time in his career last year. So he'll be starting in Dawson Knox's place. And Knox is obviously, when he's at his best, he's a great red zone target for Josh Allen. And there's not a lot of tape on Dalton Kincaid, at least as an NFL player. So that's a new wrinkle, I think, for the Bills offense. Obviously, we know about Stephon Diggs and his connection with Josh Allen, but I'm curious to see how much of that scouting that the Bengals did for Dalton Kincaid. I'm sure that he was in the conversation at that juncture with 28th overall. I'm curious how that translates to them, at least game playing for him now, considering he's in kind of a larger role.
Well, that is the injury report going into this one. Thankfully, at least on the Bengals side, I mean, there's some big names on their injury report, but it appears that most of their players are trending towards playing, and knock on wood, they've been pretty healthy, at least healthier than the Buffalo Bills. They've been unfortunately struck by the injury bug this year, as we've mentioned. So we're going to get to keys. We're going to talk about this matchup and things we are looking for in just a second, but I want to do a couple of things before we get to that. Number one is to remind folks, of course, about subscribing and listening to the show. And you can do that on a number of different platforms, with it being on YouTube. You may be watching us on YouTube right now, and that link to subscribe, there's a show link underneath John with the Cincy Jungle icon right around in that bottom corner there. Go click that to subscribe. Click the bell to be notified when new content is arriving, when it's up, when we go live, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, give a thumbs up to the videos. That helps us out. We appreciate that if you can. And, of course, if you like the audio side of things, whether it's on your commute or whatever it may be, we are on all kinds of different platforms. This show and all of the ones on the Cincy Jungle podcast channel are on your favorite audio streamer, whether that's Google, iTunes, Spotify, or iHeartRadio. Like I said, I think we're on Amazon Music now, so we're on all the major ones. Check it out. The Cincy Jungle Bengals podcast channel, our show, the Orange and Black Insider, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, and Coach Speak and Chalk Talk with the coach, Matt Minnick, all on there. We appreciate the support. Give that a rating if you would. 5 stars if you can, if you feel like it, if you feel so inclined. We appreciate it. So thank you very much for subscribing and supporting not only this show, but the Cincy Jungle podcast channel over many, many years. And if you're new here, welcome. We love the newbies. We love the ones who've been around for a while too. So appreciate all the support you've shown us. The other thing I want to get to, John, is we've got a parlay to talk about this week. Yeah. And it's self-admittedly, I am not a overly big sports bettor. So I want to, put that out there just for the, for the sake of putting a disclaimer out there. But this is a parlay that we've got here. And if you're watching us on the video channel, you can see there are 3 picks here, totaling plus 435. But what do you think of these here? There's Joe Burrow rushing yards, and the line is set at 14.5. Josh Allen rushing yards, the bar there is set at 26.5. Joe Burrow passing touchdowns, John, over 1.5 in this one. We feel that we're going over on all of those. And we talked about, especially when you talk about Joe Burrow's rushing yards, what we saw last week and him and his calf potentially being there. And then, of course, now we talked about 2 starting corners for the Buffalo Bills being on injured reserve. Their issues at linebacker, injury issues, so passing touchdowns. And then, oh, by the way, not only how the last year's Monday night game was trending, but also what Burrow was able to do in the snow in Buffalo in the playoff game. That's kind of where we're seeing a little bit of the confidence, at least with the quarterbacks, the Bengals quarterback, and then, of course, Josh Allen doing his thing on the ground, too.
Yeah, this is dangerous because I don't really see one that is I would deem not likely to hit. I think Burrow passing for 2 touchdowns is pretty expected. I think so long as he's protected in the game, he's good for at least 2. He had 2, like you said, in that playoff game. He had 3 against the 49ers. When he's been healthy and he's been on, he's found the end zone multiple times. I think they trust that more than their rushing game, kind of closer to the goal line. I don't think he's going to scoot for 43 yards like he did against the 49ers. I think that was more of an indication of, oh, Joe Burrow can run again. We weren't really prepared for this. I think McDermott's going to be more prepared for that. But I think he'll get to 15 rushing yards. So that's like 1 or 2 scrambles, and he's due for one of those. The key thing here is Josh Allen. Like that's always a huge talking point when facing the Bills. That's one of the main things that makes Allen as valuable as he is. The Bengals just allowed 57 scramble yards from Brock Purdy last week. And Josh Allen is a considerably better, more dangerous runner than Brock Purdy can ever dream to be. I think 27 rushing yards will probably hit. If I were to say the one that's not going to hit, it's probably one of these quarterback rushing props. But I think Allen's going to play pretty well. So I'll give him 27. So I'm
Okay.
for plus 435. It's pretty good.
Even with the shoulder. Okay. I like it. I like it. Well, I mean, we're not calling these locks. We're not calling them guarantees, but we feel pretty good about these. And this is kind of a safer board, it looks like, in terms of bets and taking the overs on those. Maybe not a big money maker, but if you add that in with, some other bets that you may make elsewhere, maybe this will be a little bit of icing on the cake for you. So those are our bets that we have there. Once again, we have, just to recap, over 14.5 rushing yards from Joe Burrow, over 26.5 rushing yards from Josh Allen, and over 1.5 touchdowns from Joe Burrow. And of course, got to throw the disclaimer out there for you. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE NY 467369. In Connecticut, help is available for problems gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, licensee partner Golden Nugget Lake Charles, 21 and over. Age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario, Canada. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football. Terms for eligibility and terms for play and everything there for you. And of course, to go place your bets, and please be responsible with your gaming. So that is our picks, our DraftKings picks this week. Let's get into this is a good question, actually, real quick. James Hawley says, "How do you score half a TD?" It's where the line is set, so that's where you can't break even on that one, right? Yeah. I mean, he says, "How do you score half a TD?" That's why there's that half touchdown thing. You either, if he throws one, you don't win. If he throws two, you win, and so that's where the line is, and so that's where the risk is there. Thank you, Jason. That was classy. I feel like that was classy by us, getting the DraftKings bet in there. We're doing that. Not every week, but we're doing that through some of the bigger games of the year. So check that out. And again, go to DraftKings to get your bets in this weekend. All right, John, let's talk about this, friendo. A lot. Let's just talk about the emotion part first, because this is not only going to be the Bengals, at least through their social media, are promising an atmosphere. They're trying to do this section striping thing. I'm really curious to see how that's going to work out. Aside from that, they're kind of promising at least on the same level, if not even more so, of the fanfare, the electricity, and everything in this game that we saw going into the Monday night game. Unfortunately, that all got overshadowed with the scary Damar Hamlin situation. But the Bengals at least are promising that the stadium atmosphere is going to be electric. These two teams, as we mentioned, have a lot of ties. These two teams have a lot of history just in the last 10 to 12 months. So there's going to be a high level of emotion and passion in this one.
I struggle to imagine anyone who was there last year or just this past January, who is going to this game is not going to think about that moment. It's just inevitable. It's the same two teams. It's under the lights. There's obviously high stakes with this. Like this game is going to cut. There's going to be AFC playoff implications with this game, with the ramifications of this game. Right now, the Bills are the fifth spot in the AFC playoff picture, and the Bengals are ninth. I think, neither of these teams. The Bills have like one AFC win right now. They're kind of like the Bengals, where like most of their wins are from the NFC. So this game means obviously a ton from a football sense, but there's going to be those flashbacks. There's going to be those memories, and that's going to be something that I think players on both sides who were there last year are going to have to just kind of power through. And I think fans are going to think that as well. But it is really cool. There's only been like 4 primetime games, not including the playoffs, at Paycor Stadium in the past couple of years, and every one of them has kind of seemed like its own special event, whether that's the light show or like the color schemes or Ring of Honor, whatever you want to name it. They've taken advantage of these, albeit pretty limited opportunities, and they knew that once this game was scheduled, like they had to make something special out of it. I think the whole point is to recognize what happened, to remember that, to honor it as best as they can, but also to move forward and make this thing its own thing. I think both teams are going to be wearing slightly different uniforms compared to last time too, so it's not going to look exactly the same. But I think they want to make it as special and as positive as possible, because this is the marquee game of the week, and all eyes will be on for good reason.
I think you said this quite well, that there is, for a mid-season game, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake in terms of playoff implications and really trajectories of each one of these teams. You can look at both of them and you could say there's a couple quality wins here and there, a couple of bad losses here and there as well. And especially with the Bengals having an 0-2 division record to this point, I mean, they need to get as many conference wins, much less division wins, that they can. So, I mean, last week they beat the Bucs 24-18. They lost a game that I think they were down quite a bit to the Patriots, and then the Patriots ended up barely beating them 29-25. A 14-9 ugly game against the Giants, lost to the Jags. They did beat the Dolphins earlier in the year, John. Good win for them, 48-20. But again, that was around the time, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I mean, that's when they had their corners and many of their players healthy. And so you started to see the backslide a little bit when the injuries piled up on them. So this is a big game for many, many reasons. Last week, there's kind of two ways to look at things as to how the Bengals defense played. Obviously, they created the big plays. They frustrated Purdy. They created turnovers and a couple of sacks and that sort of thing. But they did let up a lot of yards to star players. Some of it was in garbage time or end of the game when the game was a 2-possession game or what have you. So I guess who on the defense has the most pressure on them to continue performing well? Is it maybe the corners because of the good wide receiver group for the Bills and the fact that Ayuk and Kittle and others kind of went off a little bit last week? Is it the members of the secondary, the corners, to have a performance kind of like what they did, especially Cam Taylor-Britt, like they did against the Seahawks? Or do you see, again, the defensive line just needing to frustrate, hit, and sack Josh Allen, much like they did in the playoff game?
Yeah, it's just a really tall task to take on, right? Because Allen he can just evade pressure like the best of them, and he can make a lot out of nothing. I tend to look at Cam Taylor-Britt in these types of games, considering the Bengals had a lot of success shutting down Stephon Diggs in the playoff game last year, and that was mainly, it was a team effort between Taylor-Britt and Eli Apple, but Eli Apple even had a lot of success against Stephon Diggs, and that ended up with like a pretty frustrated scene on the Bills sideline. I think Diggs ended up going into the locker room kind of early. And there's a lot of stuff in the offseason, some like fake controversy between the two of them. They're they're firing on all cylinders now. Like Diggs is playing on an all-pro level. I think even Josh Allen is playing better than people give him credit for. Specifically in the past 4 weeks, despite the 2-2 record, he has not put the ball into harm's way. The success, maybe the points, maybe have not been there, but I don't think it's entirely because he's playing bad. In fact, I think he's playing. I think he's playing really well. I think he's PFF's number one graded quarterback right now for the entire season. So that first game against the Jets, where they lost by a punt return, he was terrible in that game. But I think Bengals fans can kind of attest to a quarterback starting slow and catching his footing as the season goes on. But I do look at Taylor Britt. I think he matches up. Like Diggs is an all-world receiver to me. There's really nothing that he can't really do. But I think he's a guy that you can get your hands on him and you can disrupt some of his routes. If you're able to do that, I think you can impact him. And I think that's where Taylor Britt kind of thrives. He's not as good against the shiftier receivers who get kind of these free releases and they get schemed open in that sense. The Bills are pretty straightforward with how they kind of run their offense, and they trust Diggs to create separation against the best cornerbacks. So it's a good challenge for Taylor Britt, but I think he kind of lives for that, just like he lived for going up against DK Metcalf. It wouldn't shock me if they had him following him for the entire game, just like what we saw a couple weeks ago.
I agree. I waver back and forth as to who needs to have the bigger performance this week on defense, whether that's that defensive line. Part of me says, well, even though Hendrickson played well with that ankle, having someone else step up there and in case it worsens, in case the adrenaline that maybe carried him through last game, maybe that's not all the way there at kickoff quite yet or something like that. And, maybe there's just more pain management that needs to occur since then. I expect him to play. I expect him to play well, but in case, I think part of me says, some of the other cast members on that defensive line are going to need to hit and harass Josh Allen, because that was a major key to the playoff game last year. But like you said, so was the cornerback play. So I think, again, Cam Taylor-Britt, another one, and figuring out a solution to Dawson Knox, figuring out where he's not going to be the guy that creates a mismatch. He's not going to be the guy that kills you down the seam or in the red zone. Finding a way to clamp down on him and the myriad of players they could use in that capacity. I think that's one of the areas on defense the Bengals really need to be on point.
Luckily, Dawson Knox not playing. It'll just be
Kincaid. Sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah,
gotcha.
Sorry. Yes, Dalton Kincaid.
But that's
there's so many. It's like that. It's DK. They're both DK,
well,
right? Or Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid.
They're both white too. I'll give you that one as well. No, Kincaid's a weapon. They haven't really, I don't think, unlocked him fully, and I think that's just because he's a rookie. We kind of taken for granted what Sam Laporta is doing with the Lions and how that's been kind of instant for them. So I think Kincaid's eventually going to find his way. Knock on wood, in the loudest possible sense, it doesn't seem like there's been like a tight end that's just, I mean, George Kittle, what am I saying? He played really well against the Bengals, but I don't know. It seems like they've done a better job of kind of limiting some of those types of athletes. And I think part of that is because they have this diverse group of back seven players that can match up with these guys. So I know Dax Hill didn't get a ton of opportunities last year in the playoffs, but he did have that impressive breakup. I believe it was against Dawson Knox in the end zone. It wouldn't shock me if they had Dax Hill against Dalton Kincaid for some of those isolated routes and whatnot. It's just tough though, because when Diggs and Allen kind of get going, like that's just the train that keeps the offense moving. And they have James Cook, who's been really efficient on the ground. So I think part of it is just disrupting that connection early and forcing them to kind of adjust as the game kind of goes on, because Diggs is eventually going to get his, and I'm sure Kincaid will find his way to get open a couple of times as well. But the Bills can so easily just pour down points on you, and the Bengals can't let that happen.
They cannot let that happen. And they also, like you said, they thrive in pushing the snowball down the hill, right, against a team. And but they're also a team that is a victim of that analogy as well. They can be, and that was evident in that playoff game where, if they kind of get down, it becomes a little bit of a challenge sometimes for them to climb out of a hole if things aren't going the best for them. But on offense, I think it needs to be, I mean, I know Mixon had, 5.5 yards per carry last week and all of that. I still think this needs to be a lot of what we saw through 5 quarters of play last year when these two teams played, and that was pinpoint passing. The Bills not having any answers for the Bengals receivers, regardless of weather conditions. Before the Hamlin injury, I know a lot's been made of it, but before the Hamlin injury, the Bengals were kind of having their way with the Bills on offense. And then, of course, they kind of ran away with it in the playoff game too. So I think on offense, it's got to be, another Burrow Superman-ish type of performance, and you got to get top performances. It was good to see Tyler Boyd get kind of reintegrated in things last week. It was good to see T. Higgins kind of look more like his old self last week, and I think you need to even build on top of that with those two. Chase is going to be Chase, we know that, and really try and exploit the injuries that they have on defense.
I'm been a bit surprised. Like the Bills' defensive issues are mainly with their secondary, and it's led to a lot of issues against the pass. On paper, it doesn't seem like they have enough guys to stop the run, and I think that should have been compounded with both of Jones and Milano being out. But they've been actually better against the run, albeit they've been very average in that regard. But they've been better, at least in that sense, compared to giving up explosive plays in the passing game. Last year, like Joe Mixon had a phenomenal game, and a banged up Bengals offensive line had a phenomenal game displacing that Bills defensive line. And I don't think it's gotten necessarily better. Like I think there's still a lot of depth issues, like Tim Settle. The other guy, Jordan Phillips, I think is still there, defensive tackle. Both those guys have severely underwhelmed. It wouldn't shock me if this was kind of a similar type of a game plan where they just. I was a really big fan of a lot of their under center concepts that they ran against the 49ers. It wasn't just, spamming wide zone like they did all in the beginning of last year. It was more of those toss sweeps, it was more of those misdirections, and they got the 49ers moving in different directions in certain ways. So it wouldn't shock me if a similar plan of getting under center more often again would kind of occur in this one. But also against the 49ers, the first two times that the Bengals went under center, it was both play action passes, and it was like they didn't need to set up the run to establish success in that regard. So I like what they did against San Fran. I think they can easily build off that against the Bills defense, who have very similar issues. The areas that are concerning, I think, are still on the edge, because you have both AJ Epineza, Greg Rousseau, who are basically built like the same human being. They're both like 6'6", 260, both really good matchups for the Bengals tackles, and they've both been really good during these past 4 or so games, albeit one of them is against the Giants. They don't really have any offensive linemen to speak of, but if the Bengals offensive line can stack up another game against an impressive defensive line, it'll still continue to allow the Bengals offense from just doing exactly what they want to do. And I wouldn't be shocked if it's a very similar game plan to the divisional game from last year.
And then you have a healthier and more effective offensive line. But all that being said, and I don't want to put the spotlight on one offensive lineman, but when you have the names you mentioned, Epinesa, and you got Ed Oliver. Did I hear they have, is Leonard Floyd there too?
He is.
They've got, yeah.
It'd be very interesting if Lil Collins was still here, but he's not.
Yeah. But I think all of those players across the board there, I think the spotlight does shine a little bit on Jonah Williams, because he has played pretty well. For the most part, he hasn't had those big ebbs and flows from game to game, or, a couple of good games and then one just, dismal game. And then he kind of strings together some good games again. It's been pretty steady. And so I look at him to continue his play, his level of play at right tackle this week, because I think that's going to be key, because last week, Burrow was pressured sometimes, but it's been a lot cleaner across the board in terms of hits and sacks and pressures and all of that this year, as opposed to the previous years. And when you look at the group that the Bengals trotted out last year in that playoff game, as opposed to this group, you got to have way more confidence going into Sunday night than you did into last year's playoff game.
No snow, which doesn't necessarily help out the Bengals offensive line in that regard. But you're right. It's a matchup that's more even for sure. Let's get to some of these comments, though. If you have one from Andrew Greer, is Charlie Jones back yet? He is not. He's eligible to come off of IR, but Zach Taylor put that to bed this week. Next week is when we could see him back. We had another super chat from our good friend, Mr. Whisper. We're halfway through the season now. Who was your midseason MVP on offensive and defense so far? Who is bringing their A game? Seems like pretty obvious answers to me, Anthony, but I'll let you go first.
Defense has to be Trey Hendrickson. He's just been outstanding. There's some other people who could be honorable mentions, but the honorable mentions would be, for me, a peg or two down at least from what Trey Hendrickson has been bringing to that defense. Offense is a little harder for me. I think you could look at a couple of different players. I think it has to be Jamar Chase,
Yes.
but I still think, even though it hasn't been absolutely perfect, I still think the 2-for-1 upgrade that the Bengals have made at the offensive tackles, bringing in Orlando Brown and steadying that left tackle spot a bit, and then Jonah, to his credit, moving front to the other side and steadying that right side, that right tackle spot that the Bengals haven't had an answer for like a half decade now. I think that deserves a mention as well, but it has to be Chase. Chase has been the only real consistent guy. I mean, Mixon's had some nice games here and there as well, but for me, it's the kind of the two stars on both sides of the ball. It's Trey Hendrickson and Jamar Chase.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. Both guys who I think are going to make the Pro Bowl. The fact that Joe Burrow was as bad as he was in the first 4 weeks, and Jamar Chase is still on this insane pace. He's on pace for, I think, 140 something, 140 something catches, which would be in the conversation for the most all time in a single season. The fact that he's still amongst like the best receivers in terms of just raw production, and he had a terrible quarterback for the first 4 weeks, it's just a testament to how much he continues to show up regardless. Like, he's by far been the most consistent player on offense, and he's been their best. And like you said with Trey, like when the pass rush shines, it's usually because he's out there getting at least 6-7 pressures a game for sure.
Yeah. Who do you have as some honorable mentions there?
I think Jonah Williams, like you said, deserves a shout out just for not knowing how he would translate at that position. But some players do well in contract years, some players don't. He's clearly taking it all, and he's been better than he was last year. Sacks be damned. Like, I think the pressure numbers that have improved as well. I think his consistency has more kind of ironed out. And I want to give honorable mention to Dax Hill too. Like, we didn't know for sure how well he would be at safety full time, but he's been Mr. kind of doing everything, right? He's been a jack of all trades type of player, and he's been consistently in position as well. And like, that's the sign of a player who knows what he's doing and can play confident and fast. So yeah, honorable.
Yeah, I mean, you can also throw in defense, the two linebackers in there too. I mean, there's a lot of names who have made some good plays so far this year. But yeah, they're two stars, I think, for both of us went out there. Thank you, Mr. Whisper, once again for that. Let's get to, keys and predictions. We talked about, I guess, some key players and who's got the most pressure on them. How do you see this one playing out, man?
I think because we could do the whole thing about who has more riding on this game. We can play the whole emotional card and everything. I think it all kind of balances out, to be honest with you. It's for as much as the Bills are looking for vengeance here on a multitude of layers, this is still the Bengals who have lost, I think, 3 games in the past 2 years in the months of November and December. They haven't lost at home at night since before December 2020. This is just a situation where, because I always find myself like I always trying to predict when the pendulum is going to swing the other way, right? It's why my predictions are like 85% wrong. And this would be a time like, oh, well, maybe the Bills are going to be fired up. And I think they will. I think we'll see a really good Buffalo team out there on Sunday night with a lot to play for. But I think you have to give credit to the Bengals for just consistently showing up in these spots and also just finding their groove and always showing up to play well against the best teams on their schedule, which is why I think this game is going to be back and forth the entire way. Might be in like the high 20s, I would say. If the Bengals can just limit the Bills offense to maybe just Diggs, if they allow Gabe Davis to go off, if they allow Dalton Kincaid to go off, I think it'll put a lot more stress on the Bengals offense to consistently match that, despite the fact that they have a defense that's ripe for, picking in that sense. So with all that said, both teams, lots to play for, a lot of emotions riding high. I think they'll both play extremely well. It'll be by far the best game of the week. But I'm not going to say the Bengals cover. They're 2-point favorites. I'm going to say 26-24.
26-24 Bengals.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting that you picked the Bengals. Are you going to the game?
I'm not. But, good teams win, great teams cover. They won't be a great team, I guess, Who knows?
So a lot of people, on the Bengals side of things are very, very confident in the Bengals. I mean, you see these scores here by at least a possession, if not, you see, 3 turnovers by Allen, 28-24, 38-27. There's another one up here, 35-21. I mean, you're seeing a lot of
42-17.
Yeah, I mean, 42-17. You're seeing a lot of confidence, and I understand why. And those are some mind-blowing stats that you have thrown out in terms of Bengals losses in November, December, and the last 2 years, and how they've done in primetime games in those months, etc. Josh Allen, as our friend Glenn Goodberry pointed out on Twitter, Josh Allen is 5-0 on Sunday Night Football. So that's where there's this tug of war, right? Where there's all this stuff in favor of the Bengals, but then there's a record like that. And I think while you can look back at very recent history and look at this game and say, well, the Bengals are going to just handle it. Even if it was a quarter and a half before the Damar Hamlin injury where they were asserting dominance, or if it was the playoff game. I don't see this game like that. And I think there are elements of the Bills, namely their injuries, that could get the game that way. But I think this is going to be an especially revved up Bills team. I think, though, that the Bengals, what they showed last week, where they may be heading as a team, and these are their months, like you said, November, December, these are their months where they really start to make that push. I think they're a little bid healthier, but I think I'm going to go 27-24, and it'd be a little bit of a nail biter. Bengals win this one. So pretty close to, what'd you say, 26-24?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm going to do you one better, and I'm going to say they cover, my friend. 27-24. So I don't see this one being the 10-17 point win that we saw in the playoffs, even though that was in the snow and on the road. Interesting too, and we could maybe talk about this as we get out of here, but interesting too, some of the comments that have been fired back and forth this week in terms of that weather game. But that being said, I don't know if I see that double-digit point victory for the Bengals.
It would shock me the most if one of these teams came out flat. That's all I'll say. I think you're going to get the very best of both of these teams, and maybe that leads to a 10-point victory for one of the sides. I don't know. Like, games are crazy and they're wacky, but I expect a really, really good Josh Allen and a really, really good Stephon Diggs and a Bills pass rush that's hungry. And in that same vein, I expect a Bengals team that's not going to just lie down and just let it happen. But it's streaks for the Bengals are almost always brought up by Zach Taylor before the game. I'm sure he's telling them, yeah, this quarterback's never lost on Sunday Night Football. Haven't won on Sunday Night Football, and have they ever done it? Honestly,
well, I think what wasn't the Ravens playoff game technically Sunday Night Football?
I guess.
I don't know.
I suppose it's like a regular season.
It's not. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but you're right. One of these things has to give, right? It's just one. Both these things can't continue, I guess, and it's just who knows.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get on out of here, and I think one of the things that at least I wanted to bring up as we drop the mic is some of that stuff going on, and I find it funny a little bit that supposedly, I think it was Tyler Boyd via either Jeremy Roush or Joe Daneman on Fox 19. I can't remember exactly because I don't have it in front of me, but there was a video clip out there that he was talking. I think it was Tyler Boyd talking about how he had heard from many of the Bills players that they thought they would have won if it wasn't in the snow. And it's like, well, that's your home stadium. I mean, the weather, to me, it's just a weird statement where, yeah, oftentimes you don't play very well in harsh elements like that. I forget who it was that I recently heard announcing a game, but I mean, they said it was a former quarterback, and they said basically that give me the snow, not the rain. I want to play in that, not, because it's easier to throw the ball in the snow oftentimes than it is in either drizzle or rain, that sort of thing. So I don't know, man. I just find that very weird. And I think I remember that being a little bit of a talking point in the offseason and or shortly after that loss. But Tyler Boyd rehashed that, and I go, it's just a weird comment that you say, oh, well, if it wasn't snowing at our home stadium, we would have won. Well, I mean, what would have happened if the Bengals had all their starting offensive linemen? I don't know.
It was Isaiah McKenzie, who is no longer playing for the Bills, but he said it in May, and he was talking about how
on a
Bengals,
podcast, right?
Yeah, he was talking with Tyler Dune, who does a great job of covering the Bills in the entire NFL. Talking about the offensive attack, it would have been different if it wasn't snowing, or it would have been more effective if it wasn't snowing. And he said the game may have gone differently if it was in a dome, which I think there's some logic to that. I think the way that the Bills receivers kind of operate with Allen at quarterback, it wasn't the greatest mix. But you're right. The optics of a team who plays in Buffalo and presumably practices in harsh weather, it's not great. I'm curious who Boyd has heard from, who's still on the team, mind you. Again, Isaiah McKenzie plays for the Indianapolis Colts now. He's no longer a Buffalo Bill. I'm curious who he's heard from on the team who still feels that way. But it just leads into both sides just using as much motivation and, emotion as possible to kind of gear themselves up for a game that I don't think needs any more fanfare. It's a big game for a lot of reasons.
It's odd to me, though, just that comment, because if you are a Buffalo Bills player, look at the teams that you would probably play in the postseason. Let's just say one of 4 AFC North teams. That's going to be bad weather and outdoors. Your own stadium, bad weather and outdoors. New England Patriots, bad weather outdoors. Even your Jacksonville's, that could be rainy and wet.
The right? Chiefs.
The Chiefs in Arrowhead, that'll be bad weather. I mean, it's just I don't know. It was a statement that I just kind of go, okay. I mean, I guess you're not wrong, but I mean, that's where you play. Those are the elements you have to withstand. I don't know.
I mean, I imagine there are people on the Browns side who were laughing at Jamar Chase calling them elves even after the loss. It's just something that goes, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Anything else before we get on out of here, my friend?
That's a good mic drop, though, considering that popped up again, and it's been on Boyd's mind for how many months has it been? Like 6 months. So, again, there's a lot riding on this game for a lot of reasons, and I hope everyone going to the game has a much better experience this time than last time.
For sure. Well, for John, I'm Anthony. This has been the Orange and Black Insider. There is a huge game this Sunday at Paycor Stadium. It'll be electric. Not only the game itself, but pregame festivities and everything. Should be a great one, and hope everybody enjoys it. Again, subscribe to our channels via YouTube and or on the your favorite audio app. Go do that and check out all the shows that we have. Go give a thumbs up to the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. Check out cincyjungle.com, and of course what John's doing over at atozsports.com. And you got to go get your bets in at DraftKings. Go check that out and go back and maybe think about our parlay that we suggested for you. We politely suggested it for you. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the game. We'll be back to talk about it this weekend and into next week.